listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And hello, America. I don't know why we had an echo there for a second, but welcome to our show here. It is Friday, October 20th, 2017, and end of a week. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. I don't know about you. I could use a nice, restful weekend. This last week, between computer problems and power and light and internet and all the rest of it, was a little frustrating, and I think I need to strive for some Zen-like calm over the next few days. Obviously, right now, the biggest story in the independent media, certainly, and now on Fox News, is the uranium deal. It is a huge corruption, bribery scandal. It's probably the biggest one in all of U.S. history. And the deafening silence from the left wing, Hillary supporters, most of the corporate media, except for Fox News, it really underscores how scared they are of this. And I think all of these people engaged in this kind of massive corruption because they were convinced Hillary was going to win the White House or steal the White House, and they wouldn't have to worry about any kind of prosecutions. And that's why they've all been on the attack against Donald Trump ever since he won the election. Because if he ever takes a moment to take a look at what's going on, and he's obviously paying attention to this, you're going to see some real investigations and real prosecution, because I'm sure a lot of people in the federal government now understand their credibility and legitimacy as a whole is now on the line if they fail to act. Same thing with the corporate media. Now, interestingly enough, all the way back in June of this year, CNBC's Barton Romo grilled John Podesta on Uranium One in Russia. So it's not like they don't know the story was out there, didn't know the story was out there, but it got hushed up. And now the corporate media is getting defensive about the story here. Andre Mitchell literally came on out and said, we've covered the Uranium One story. We gave it 92 seconds of coverage 2 years ago. So what do you mean a blackout, media blackout? I mean, that is really lame. Still lots of coverage on Donald Trump's phone call to the Gold Star widow. A lot of coverage dwindling on the NFL, dwindling on Weinstein, but that's what they're focusing on, all this stuff. They're still going on about the phone call. More about that a little bit later. But basically what we're talking about is that interests within the Russian nuclear industry were bribing U.S. officials to get their hands on America's uranium ore. 20% of American uranium was transferred to the control of the Russians. You know, those people that the corporate media have been saying all those bad things about, those Russians. And what do you make out of uranium? Well, you can make paint, if you don't mind glowing in the dark. You can make nuclear power stations with it. You can also make bombs. And the FBI had an inside informant. They knew what was going on. They've got hard evidence. And basically, Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, was in a position to approve or deny the deal. She approved it, and $145 million poured into the Clinton Foundation. There is definitely a story here. And the corporate media is out there, who's interested in that stuff? Who's interested? But like I said, Fox News is out there finally doing a good job. Lou Dobbs just went after Attorney General Jeff Sessions last night about this whole issue. And so everybody in the government has to know that everybody in the country knows what's going on. And that's why I say the legitimacy and credibility of the entire government is now on the line. It was severely damaged when James Comey read off that list of Title 18 felony violations Hillary Clinton committed with her email server and then gave her a free pass. So apparently the FBI for a decade ran an operation called Ghost Stories to monitor and rip apart a deep cover Russian agent network. And apparently they arrested 10 of the spies in June of 2010. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton worked feverishly to get the Russian agents sent back to Moscow in a hastily arranged, lopsided deal with Putin. It kind of reminds me about the dancing Israelis who turned out to be Mossad agents on 9/11 and how they were very quickly sent back to Israel. And the liberals are circling the wagons here. A former press secretary for Bill Clinton, Peter, basically came on out attacking Peter Schweitzer over this story. He said, how dare you? I mean, how dare you dare to dare to dare? This is not going to go away. We're not going to let this go away. We're repeating the lesson of the Downing Street memo, where it was a major story in the independent media for like a month, and finally the corporate media had to look at it. Dismissively, but they looked at it. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Meanwhile, over on Hannity's program, he's basically announced the House Committee is now looking into this matter and looking into the issue that there were 2,800 Huma Abedin government documents on Anthony Weiner's laptop. And according to Judge Napolitano, it will lead to a Clinton indictment if the FBI reopens the case. So again, FBI, your credibility as an institution is on the line. Reopen the investigation or be seen by all of America as part of that corrupted swamp. And they are getting scared here. They are getting scared, and they're trying to stall, they're trying to delay. And apparently in one of the actions for Judicial Watch, the Department of State is saying it still has 40,000 Hillary documents that the FBI found. They still need to process them, and they won't be able to turn them over until 2020. That's a stonewall. Now, getting back over to Fusion GPS, two of their top figures, Peter Fritsch and Thomas Cotton, have now officially pled the Fifth Amendment, which is as much as saying, yeah, they did something wrong, and they know they did something wrong, and they're going to shut up about it. But Senator Grassley has come on out with another interesting question, because apparently Fusion GPS made use of paid assets within the corporate media to spread their opposition research, a.k.a. smears. And so Senator Grassley wants to know which journalists in Washington, D.C. were given financial incentives to spread that Trump dossier in the media. A pay-for-play operation. So it's just getting worse and worse. Now, to show you how scared they're getting, they're pulling out all the old guard. George W. Bush is out there saying, oh, he's a racist. And they're trying to get everybody to come on out and defend the liberal establishment from the liberals' own actions. And so former Attorney General Eric Holder, who was Attorney General under Obama before Loretta Lynch, came on out and defended James Comey for drafting an exoneration letter before completing the Clinton investigation. And Holder is out there saying, it's no big deal. He's an honest guy, and he just sort of knew right at the beginning this investigation had no merit, and it was a good faith assessment by a person who I think has done a lot for this country. Man, oh man, anybody in the fertilizer business, just back the truck up there to Washington, D.C., because it's just pouring out the windows there. Meanwhile, Eric Holder is openly out there. He came out and said he's part of the Trump resistance. And remember, Eric Holder was one of the people who okayed that Uranium One deal. And so now he's part of the Trump resistance. Like I said, they engaged in all of this massive bribery, corruption, selling out America's uranium to Russia, because they were convinced Hillary would steal the White House and they wouldn't have to worry about investigations or prosecutions or anything. And Trump won with so many Americans voted him. It was a landslide that overcame the election fraud. And remember, we now know there's at least 11,000 documented cases of election fraud in last year. I'm sorry, 1,100. Is that 1,100, 11,000? I have to go back and look at the number. It's a huge number in every single state. And that's why they're all panicking, why they're out there trying to get rid of Donald Trump, because they know that he still has another 3 years to bring prosecutions against them. And now you've got committees in both the House and the Senate are saying, we have to look at this. The American people know what went on. We have to deal with it. We're going to take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I think you'll probably talk about this later, about Bahrain looking to buy the S-400 missile system now.
It actually wasn't on the list of talking points, but yes. Everybody wants that S-400 now.
Yep, because they're rolling out the S-500, I believe, next year. But, hey, Mike, ConocoPhillips, is that a British or a French company? Because I saw the Kurds handed back the largest gas field to the Russians in Syria, and it said Conoco gas field. Is that ConocoPhillips a French company?
Okay. Could you give me that one more time?
Yeah, the Kurds handed back the gas fields to the Russians in Syria, the largest gas field in Syria. It's like Conoco gas field. So I wonder if that's ConocoPhillips, which was that a British company maybe or French?
It may be. I actually don't know where ConocoPhillips is domiciled. It's a multinational, but I don't know where their corporate headquarters are. I think it may be British, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, because there's an oil refinery that's the largest oil refinery in Syria, and that's probably the last big thing to grab. And I know each side's racing to grab it now. But why would the Kurds give that back? Maybe because the U.S. basically dumped them?
Well, we know that the Kurds have just made a huge deal with Russia for oil because they're feeling betrayed by the U.S. And pressured by Iran. But as far as Syria is concerned, it isn't necessarily the refinery. Everybody's racing to control that one last really large oil field and its revenues. And I think it's in the back of some people's minds that Syria is still going to resolve itself with some kind of a partitioning, and that they want the oil fields to be in their partition.
And then one more quick thing. I just want to let you know they're looking at the Super Hornet, the F-18 Super Hornet, to do some upgrades on it now, because maybe they're seeing the writing on the wall with the F-35. So maybe they're just going to look at the existing platforms we got. F-18 and F-16 are great planes, and they should have just upgraded them from the beginning instead of But how it's a money pit.
Well, it is, and there's also the fact that the F-16 and the F-18 are not radar stealthy, which was the whole big deal of pushing into the F-22 and the F-35. But even upgrading an aircraft may not work. We were going to mention this later in the show. An upgraded American F-4 Phantom crashed on takeoff in Japan. The crew escaped, but again, it indicates that these weapon systems are actually very fragile.
And Mike, the Su-30, which was that the first plane that uses that vector nozzle thrust? I believe the F-22 was our first plane that uses. So the Russians had that actually, I believe, for quite a while.
Yes.
Before we had. So they're on their next, with the PAC T-50, which is their stealth fighter. That has probably a next generation version. So we're kind of behind on that also, besides missile tech.
Yeah, we are. Russia's led the way on a lot of tech. You remember that swing wing on the F-111? That was copied from a Russian design.
All right, thanks, Mike. Have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to the news. You've probably been hearing about this lady, Frederica Wilson. She's a Democratic representative, and she's at the forefront of keeping this whole Trump phone call to the gold medal widow, how inappropriate, he was rude and insensitive to her. And basically a lot of people are saying it is unconscionable how Frederica Wilson politicized the Trump phone call. Now, the widow herself, just appalled at how everybody was trying to distort the story, has now posted the video that was being made of that phone call in its entirety. And it's very respectful. It's very complimentary. And again, it's another huge nothing burger coming on out there by these liberal Democrats who are desperate to get rid of Trump before some of them start getting thrown in jail. Meanwhile, Frederica Wilson has now come out accusing White House Chief of Staff John Kelly of racism. It almost seems like that's become the automatic knee-jerk reaction of the liberals. If you're not winning your argument, just scream you're a racist and, stomp out indignantly. And it's gone a little bit too far, and it's worn out. By the way, side note, for all her talk about the gold medal widow and the soldier who died and everything, U.S. Representative Frederica Wilson has voted against 10 House bills to help veterans. So again, she's not really on the side of the veterans. She's just seizing an opportunity to go after Donald Trump yet again. Now, in brief, this is going to be the only story about Harvey Weinstein that we're going to do today because we got so much else to talk about. Ann Coulter came out with an interesting article explaining why Harvey Weinstein got away with what he was doing for so long, because apparently Weinstein has a lot of allies in the corporate media, and basically Tina Brown, one of Weinstein's erstwhile cleanup gals, told Charlie Rose, what I found really unsettling was how many journalists, frankly, were on his payroll. So, again, a big part of the fault for why Harvey Weinstein was able to get away with what he was doing for so long was the corporate media. They were protecting him, same way they were protecting Hillary Clinton, same way they're still trying to protect Hillary Clinton. Now, there is a company, Esponda Productions, LLC, and they produced a documentary about the pedophile problem in Hollywood. And it's currently linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. And for a limited time, you can watch it for free. This isn't pirated. This isn't stolen. This is the production company itself putting it up on Vimeo and saying, yeah, come and look at this. We've been talking about this for a very, very long time, and for a limited time, you can watch the documentary for free. And after that, it will be for sale, and they're promising that the proceeds from the sales are going to go to charities that deal with these abused children, these abused child stars. But it's a bit of an eye-opener. Now, getting on to the war zones here, Russia right now is almost the only source of humanitarian aid going into Syria. Iran is helping a little bit. Virtually nothing from the United Nations, nothing from the United States, nothing from the other Western countries. Now, there's a refugee camp, the Rukban refugee camp. It's located on the Syrian-Jordanian border in the so-called deconfliction zone arbitrarily established by the United States around 10th. And they're facing a humanitarian disaster because the Americans are using aviation, rocket, and artillery systems to prevent Syrian government workers from entering the zone. And there's 60,000 people in there. They're threatened with starvation. They have no access to fresh water. Well, if it works in Yemen, it'll work in Syria. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the war zones, and there are plenty of them. And apparently there's another one of these billionaires who's going to finance an impeach Donald Trump campaign. In this case, it's on the basis that Trump has brought us to the edge of nuclear war. And while I'm always very suspicious of billionaires talking about impeachment, I have to agree. For me, the single biggest disappointment in Donald Trump was his war policy, because he campaigned on no more foreign interventions, and here we are, interventions up to our nostrils. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of State has now officially admitted that militants linked to al-Nusra Front are carrying out terrorist attacks using chemical weapons in Syria. And Russia's defense ministry is saying, effectively, it's about time. So, yeah, but what has the corporate media been telling you all this time? Oh, it's Assad. It's Assad. Trust us. It's Assad. He's bad, 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 bad. You know, our U.S.-backed forces would never, ever, ever do anything like that. Now the State Department says that they have. Now, interestingly enough, there is this group that claims to be fighting against Russian propaganda and fake news. And they're now asking a reporter not to pursue information on the CIA's arming of the Syrian rebels. The group is called Prop or Not. They're famous for being an ex-source for the Washington Post. And they're saying the story might fall into the wrong hands, you know, like we the American people. So Jason Leopold, who's a senior investigative reporter at BuzzFeed, tweeted that he'd filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the CIA for documents related to the U.S. arming Syrian rebels. And Prop or Not is already out there saying, please don't do that. Really, that information is too dangerous to allow out. It'll get into the wrong hands, like the American people, and then what will they think of us? Probably about what we think of you right now. Seriously. There's been an explosion inside a mosque in Kabul, Afghanistan, casualties reported. And I know it almost seems like in this day and age another terrorist attack is no big deal. My concern, however, is that this sudden surge of terror attacks in Afghanistan could be seized on by the U.S. government as an excuse to escalate the situation in Afghanistan. Because they've been stuck in that quagmire for years. In fact, the U.S. war on Afghanistan is the longest war in our entire history. 16 years. We have kids starting high school who weren't even alive when this war started. And they're trying to figure out a way to send more troops and convince the war-weary American people that, yeah, so far we haven't done much in Afghanistan except secure a pipeline route and a reliable supply of opium, but yes, let's go on in and give them what for. Now, as I mentioned to Dustin in New Jersey, the Kurdistan Regional Government in Iraq has announced it has signed a deal with the Russian state-owned oil corporation Rosneft that would allow the company to begin developing oil blocks worth a potential $400 million to the Kurds. This is probably going to up the ante, so to speak, from Iraq's point of view. But again, the more the U.S. and the West are pushing on these countries, the more they pivot to Russia. This is a failed policy. And they keep on doing it, which is the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Now, this is an alarming development here. Apparently, head of the CIA, Pompeo, is out there obsessing about the Islamic Republic's continued testing of ballistic missiles. And he's announced that the CIA is going to become a much more vicious agency in fighting their adversaries. The CIA are not the swell bunch of guys you see in the movies or read about in the Tom Clancy novels. We all wish they were, but they aren't. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, interestingly enough, we're seeing this continued debate over the Iran deal, and Trump's already refused to recertify. He's basically destroyed the credibility of the U.S. government with other governments around the world. And the war hawks are all out there saying, yes, now we can go have war with Iran. Well, if you really feel that way, here are your jumpsuits, here are your rifles, and here are your parachutes. You guys go on, have fun, leave the rest of us alone here. It turns out, though, that according to the latest polls, 3/4 of Americans support the current Iran deal. So Trump is not operating from his base here. And yes, it's one of the areas where he did campaign on this issue, that as president he would tear down the Iran deal. But it's how it's being done that is creating a political backlash that is going to haunt the United States government's international relationships for decades to come. And again, more and more countries are beginning to realize that the issue here is whether or not nations have a right to self-defense in the face of an obviously rogue, belligerent nation that is trying to gobble up the rest of the world. And of course, yes, everybody has a right to defense, even down to us individual citizens. That's what the Second Amendment is about. We have a right to defend ourselves. So Putin is wagging his finger again at the U.S. government for failing to keep their end of a bargain in a host of international disarmament agreements. We were talking the other day about the chemical weapons. Russia has destroyed, all their biological weapons, and the U.S. is out there saying, oh, we forgot about these over here. And they have the largest stockpile of these weapons on Earth. And so basically, speaking at a question and answer session at the Valdai Discussion Club in Sochi, Putin began by recalling the megatons to megawatts program, which ran between 1993 and 2013 and saw Russia downblend enriched uranium from the equivalent of about 20,000 nuclear warheads were decommissioned, and they took the highly enriched uranium and they diluted it down to low enriched uranium to be used as fuel by U.S. power stations. And then the U.S. turns around and starts doing things like bombing Belgrade. Right now, the U.S. government has a serious problem. No other government on earth trusts them, and with very, very good reason. The U.S. government has a serious credibility problem of its own making, and I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. Now, one possible aspect of this loss of trust is that Russia has announced they have no intention to join the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, as it is of destabilizing nature. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said at the Moscow Non-Proliferation Conference on Friday, he said, we're concerned over the fact we're approaching the 2020 review conference under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons with disquieting results so far. The destructive actions by some states, which have broken the consensus on the draft final document of the previous conference, have done considerable damage to the viability of the treaty. So now the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty may collapse. And again, the U.S. violated that, certainly in Iran. Under the terms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the U.S. is obligated to help nations develop peaceful uses of nuclear energy, like power stations. And frankly, if the U.S. government had really been concerned about a secret bomb factory underneath Iran's power station, the way Israel has under Dimona, the obvious solution is go on in there, offer your help pour the foundations, lay the wiring, put in the piping and everything, and then you know that it's just a power station. But it was far more amenable to the war agenda to just sit back in the U.S. and say, oh, we know Iran is doing all these terrible things here, even though the IAEA says, yeah. And again, by using the threat of military force to convince Iran, to coerce Iran, rather, to surrender its rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, it puts the U.S. in the wrong yet again under international law. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley over at the United Nations is out there screaming that Russia's meddling in our election is warfare. They've committed an act of war against us. When a country can come interfere in another country's elections, that is warfare. There's only one problem with that. There's no evidence that Russia interfered with the election. All of the election fraud discovered so far from last year's election was being done by the liberals, and it all favored Hillary Clinton. There just wasn't enough of it. And even the head of the CIA is saying if there was any Russian meddling, it was too small to have any real effect. Certainly far less effect than all those millions of illegal immigrants who voted, those however many dead people who voted in 2 different states. There was massive election fraud last year, but it wasn't Russia that was doing it. I think Russia, to be very honest, would have been much happier with Hillary Clinton as president because she is blackmailable over that Uranium One deal, and she would have been the perfect Russian candidate in office, the perfect Russian puppet, a president of the United States of America who will do whatever Russia says. That's what Hillary Clinton would have been. She's trying to say that that's what Trump is. She's just projecting her own guilt because she had to know if she did this deal with Russia, she's open to blackmail by Russia. But she didn't care. Just the lure of that money, $145 million. I can't even conceive of how much money that is. I know it's a lot. I can see how many zeros there are there. We have been talking about the deterioration of our military preparedness. We've been at war in all these different countries for 16 years. We're using up our stockpiles. We're wearing out the military machinery, tanks, trucks, planes. They're not designed to last a very, very long time because the models are, once they go into combat, their lifespan is measured maybe in a few months. So they're not built to last 5 or 10 years. We've been talking about the obvious problems with command of our Navy ships, with the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain ignoring the rules of the road, so to speak, right of way, and getting into these horrible accidents. And now there's apparently another problem over on one of the ships over there at North Korea. And apparently the cruiser Shiloh, there's a huge morale problem. And it's coming on out where the sailors on board are saying they hate their ship. That's a really bad thing. You want the sailors to feel like that ship is their home. You want them to love that ship so that they'll care for it. And if they hate the ship, you're not going to get quality work. Apparently, one shipmate said it's only a matter of time before something horrible happens. Another sailor, our sailors do not trust the CO. Another one said it's a floating prison. Another sailor said, I just pray we never have to shoot down a missile from North Korea because then our ineffectiveness will really show. And apparently a big part of the problem is the commanding officer's micromanagement, and apparently minor on-the-job mistakes often led to time in the brig on a diet of bread and water. I mean, seriously, Captain Bligh is not a model. He's not a role model for the Navy. He messed up on the Bounty. He pushed his men too hard, and there comes a breaking point. And by the way, after the mutiny on the Bounty, Captain Bligh was actually briefly governor of Sydney, Australia. And he did the same thing there, and it resulted in a revolution and a backlash. A crew on a ship has to be a team. And yes, there is the captain, and there's a chain of command, but you still have to realize it is a team working together, not just the captain up there saying, do this, do that, or I'll throw you in the brig. The Navy has a serious personnel problem. As I mentioned earlier in the show, there was apparently this Japanese Air Force base, and they had this updated, maintained Phantom F-4. They were about to go on a training flight from Hikari Air Base in Ibaraki Prefecture in eastern Japan, and apparently the jet just burst into flames just before takeoff. And fortunately, the flight crew got out. They were able to run away to safety. Now, here's something really weird. As you know, Great Britain has been suckered into buying the F-35. And this idea of globalization really comes back to haunt you in the event of war, because right now, the British F-35 engines have to be sent to Turkey when they need an overhaul, which is a regular occurring thing. There's a lot of wear and tear on those military jet engines. And see, if you get into a war and all of a sudden Turkey's on the other side, you start getting into trouble. How do you get your engines overhauled? Now, of course, back in World War II, all the weapons being used were domestically produced by the countries using them, for the most part. There were some exports. Italy was exporting to one side at the start of the war and to the other side at the other end of the war. But like the British Spitfire was produced almost entirely in Great Britain. This idea of a distributed procurement chain for the military across the globe, that's very vulnerable. It's very fragile if the world goes to a shooting war. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Fox News is actually covering the story where this school in Massachusetts canceled the Halloween parade because it wasn't politically correct enough. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. Let's get into the economic news here. As you know, the corporate media is just celebrating the Dow has crossed 23,000. It's heading for 24,000. Nowhere to go but up, which is what they were saying in October of 1929, I think it was. But again, we have people like Paul Craig Roberts who are out there saying it's all an illusion. They're just pouring money in to Wall Street to make it look like it's profitable and drive those stocks up to use them as a political banner. See, the economy's wonderful. Look at the stock market. You know, how can you complain about how can you even think that the recession is not over? Look at the stock market. Look how rich these people are all becoming. But it is all an illusion. The stock market is totally disconnected from the real U.S. economy right now. And even worse, there's the problem of overvaluation. Now, normally in a healthy stock market, the price of the stock should reflect that stock's underlying value in terms of its earnings, dividends, what have you. There's a ratio between price and earnings. When you start using market forces and manipulation to drive up the price of a stock, you start creating a gap between what the stock's price is and what it actually should be based on the value of the underlying stock. And that can be a bit of a problem because it means that elevated price is existing without any real support. Now, right now, stocks are very heavily overvalued because of all the manipulation, and they're almost twice as overvalued as they were in 1987 before that crash occurred, and that took about 20% off the market. I remember when that one happened. Everybody was just in a panic. This idea that there's no place to go but up, it's a typical Wall Street fantasy. It's never been proven out in history. It's all fakery. It's plunge protection team. It's manipulation to placate the masses. Oh, we've got wonderfully low unemployment and wonderfully high stock market. Everything's going along just fine. But like I said, if you want to know what's really going on in the United States, walk down your nearest town and open your eyes and look at it as if you are a tourist from someplace else. See all the cracks in the pavement, the corroded metal, the decayed infrastructure, the retail vacancies. We're getting ready to hit the holiday shopping season, and there's a lot of retail vacancies down there at the local mall. We have iconic retailers going out of business, Retail-mageddon, because people, ordinary people like you and I, we just don't have the money to spend. Anyway. Now, over in Great Britain, computer reseller Misco has been forced into administration, which is their term for bankruptcy, and so that's lost about 300 jobs there. The real problem, though, in Europe, as it is here in America, is the derivatives exposure. Now, we haven't talked about this for a while, so a quick little recap. A derivative is any financial instrument whose worth is based on another financial transaction. And the most commonly used one, abused one, is what is called an interest swap. And what that basically means is if I go to a company and I buy $100,000 worth of their stock, or I invest $100,000 in their stock, I go to the same brokerage and I get a swap, which acts like an insurance policy, where if the company goes bust and I lose my investment, I get at least part of it coming back from the swap. It's kind of like an insurance policy, but there are key differences that you need to keep in mind. One is in regular insurance, like fire insurance, you have to own the asset being insured. That doesn't apply to these interest swaps. You can make these bets on other people's transactions. One of the things that Goldman Sachs was criticized for was helping California issue their California bonds, then turn around and started betting against the California bond by selling swaps against it. And there's no limit to how many of these policies you can take out on the same transaction. They're unregulated, and the providers of these derivatives are not required to keep capital reserves on hand to pay expected losses. That's what drove AIG out of business back in 2008. Well, everybody loves derivatives. They're like instant money. As long as the economy is going up, you just take the money in the front door. You don't worry about paying it out. But that never lasts. And right now, the European Union has more than 450 trillion pounds, with a T, trillion, of exposure to derivatives. And it's estimated that the total derivative exposure around the world is close to $1 quadrillion. That's more than basically the entire planet is worth right now. And it's all paper magic. It's all bookkeeping. None of it's real. But this is what happens when you allow the money junkies to operate without any kind of reasonable controls. They're addicted to gambling because that's what Wall Street is. It's a giant open-air gambling casino. And everybody there is hopped up on the action, the excitement, the adrenaline, the cocaine. Wolf of Wall Street is a true story. If you haven't seen that movie, and if you do watch it, you might want to keep the kids out of the room. Now, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, over in Canada, the Bank of Nova Scotia is getting ready to try and sell its gold business, Scotia Mocatta. And this is following a massive money laundering scandal centered on a U.S. refinery that involves smuggled gold from South America. Now, like diamonds, there are supposed to be these legitimate sources of gold, and then there's gold coming from people we don't like. And there's a lot of gold smuggling and gold laundering. And, of course, the wonderful thing about gold is you can melt it, recast it. There's no way to trace it back to where it came from. So Scotiabank is having to dump their precious metals division. Getting on back to Europe, their secession problems are not going to go away anytime soon. You've had the Catalan vote. Now you've got Lombardy and Veneto referendums that are being planned. And Scotland is now talking about a second independence referendum, knowing that the first one was subject to massive election fraud. There's talk of France leaving the EU, Germany, Belgium, and Romania. It's starting to come apart, and the globalists are just absolutely having cows. Now, over in Madrid, one of their politicians, Jose Marie Aznar, is getting ready to take a page from Hillary Clinton's book and blame the entire Catalan push for independence on Russia. It's those evil Russians, they're doing it. Russia's being blamed for everything. Russia extincted the woolly mammoths. Russia is stealing socks out of your dryer. It really is ridiculous here. Now the Czech Republic is talking about holding a referendum on leaving the EU, according to the leader of one of their far-right parties. And these far-right Eurosceptic parties, they're coming on strong. Look at the losses suffered by Angela Merkel in Germany. Look at the results of the recent Austrian elections. The ordinary people have had enough with this empire building at their expense. They want to go back to being their own little nation with their own culture and their own history. Get on back to the news. Getting on back to the economic news, well, actually the news in Europe, and this is somewhat economic. Apparently, the Catalan separatists are now urging their supporters to start pulling cash from ATMs. It was supposed to start this morning. I don't know how effective it's actually been. But apparently, Assemblea Nacional urged supporters to pull cash from CaixaBank and Banco Sabadell branches as a protest against their decision to shift their legal domiciles out of the region. So we'll see what happens there. Now, getting into the realm of political correctness, this is pretty sick. Wyoming man identifies as a transgender woman, has not gone through any hormone treatments or surgery. And this guy, Miguel Martinez, who goes by the name Michelle, identifies as a transgender woman, is now on trial for sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl in a bathroom. The whole country's going crazy. It's being driven crazy by all this political correctness stuff. All right, we've got time for one quick phone call before the commercial break. Greg in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to help that guy out. He was talking about the Smith-Mundt Act.
Yeah.
The anti-propaganda. U.S. ends ban on domestic propaganda, RT wrote it up as.
Yeah, well, I thought that might be what he was talking about.
I believe he was speaking of this.
Yeah, well, I thought that might be what he was talking about, but that wasn't just the corporate media. That was the government using propaganda, because previously there had, in fact, been a ban on propaganda used against the American people. So, yeah, and we've talked about this one before as well. Anyway, thank you for the update. Thank you for the information, Greg. We're going to have to let you go. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm getting a whole bunch of email responding to that question of just who made it legal to lie to the American people. And again, this is not just the corporate media, but the government as a whole. And in addition to the last caller's reference, apparently the NDAA also authorizes the government to lie to the American people. And there's nothing new about it. I'm being sent all these stories going all the way back to the Bush administration, in which they're admitting that, yeah, the government gives the corporate media prepackaged news reports that are run as news. And that's a reality all Americans basically need to be dealing with as they decide whether what they're being shown by that corporate media is real or not. And my opinion is right now you can't trust anything on the corporate media except the sports scores and the weather, and they're not even all that good on the weather. All right, getting on back to the other news here. We're talking about political correctness. We're talking about how our entire society is being driven to insanity with all this PC, Black Lives Matter, retributions for imagined crimes and so forth. And this is a good example of where this is leading. because apparently, this is an article over in Investment Watch blog, there was a black man reportedly attacked his fellow Maryland Metrobus passenger, a 52-year-old homeless and disabled white man, spitting in the man's face and blaming him for making my grandmother a slave. And so this gentleman, Marquis Evans Royster, 27 years old, attacked this 52-year-old man, saying, "You owe me for making my grandmother a slave." Then he starts going through the guy's pockets. He's just robbing them in view of everyone. And at that point, the other passengers intervened, and he was putting up a fight. And the only thing that stopped it was the bus driver said, "I'm calling the police right now." And so the suspect got off the bus without paying. And the driver reported that Evans Royster referred to all white people as evil and said that 2 white passengers on the bus should die. And apparently on his way out of the bus, he ripped off one of the bus's side view mirrors. Now, there is a little reality that all of these slavery reparations activists need to understand. Just prior to the Civil War, at the peak of slavery in the United States, only 1.5% of the population owned slaves. The vast majority of white people were not, in fact, slave owners. But if you're trying to fan up victimhood in order to turn a certain segment of the society into a political force, details don't really matter. Now, here's another example of where we're going with our society. Apparently, over at Pittsburgh King Pre-K 8 school, there was a teacher, 46-year-old Janice Watkins, and apparently during the class, she tried to confiscate a cell phone from one of the students because the school district has a no cell phone policy. And the student responded by biting the teacher. The parents were called. The parents came on in and basically took the position of, "You have no right to take my student's or my child's phone." And apparently the teacher was driving on her way home, sitting in traffic, when the student's mother and another male basically ran up, hit her in the head with a brick, dragged her out of the car, and basically beat her up. Now, this is not in any modern society acceptable behavior. But it's almost like this kind of excess is being sold as a reasonable response to slavery. And again, something you need to remember. Nobody alive today was ever a slave on the antebellum South. Nobody alive today was ever forced to pick cotton. Nobody alive today is a slave owner. This is being fanned up to create divisions within our society so that we do not unite against the real source of all of our poverty and oppression. We'll be right back after these commercials. Now, over at the University of Arizona, they launched a pilot program where students were going to be recruited to be social justice advocates who would be trained to report any bias incidents that occurred in dorms while hosting educational events on social justice issues for residents. And these social justice advocates were trained to report any bias incidents. And, it's like the witch hunts. If you're paid to hunt witches, you'll see witches everywhere. If you're being incentivized to report bias, you'll see bias everywhere. And there was a huge backlash from political commentators saying that the University of Arizona was essentially attempting to turn the entire student body into a bunch of snitches. And the University of Arizona came back and said, all right, well, we're going to redefine and redesign the program and its responsibilities. And then they came on out and said they're just dropping it. They're quitting the whole idea. And political correctness, like any other fad, and that's really what it's been, it does reach a point of ridiculousness, at which point it burns out. And I think we're just about there. Not entirely, and here's a good example. A gentleman by the name of Tim Cox, His nickname is English. It's a nickname since he's had at school, and he added it to his Facebook profile. And Facebook has now banned the word English from his profile, even though he's used it for the last 9 years. And apparently Facebook removed it after a complaint by a member of the public who thinks the word English is racist and non-inclusive. Now, Facebook said it's a violation of its policies to use a fake name, even though there are other profiles that use names such as Osama bin Laden. This is more political correctness. Can't use the word, can't use the E word. It's racist. Now, there's a bit of a media blackout on this. In fact, some of the media is out there already saying this story didn't really happen, that it's fake news. But the story is Jesus Fabian Gonzalez has been arrested for suspicion of arson in Sonoma County, wine country. And Sonoma County is a sanctuary county. And Jesus Fabian Gonzalez is an illegal immigrant. And it's another illustration about how this liberal ideology of open borders and all-inclusiveness wasn't really thought all the way through. Or if it was, that the inevitable negative downsides of the illegal immigrants and the refugees were simply being ignored here in the U.S. for the sake of more Democratic voters. But we continue to see this criminal, violent behavior here in the U.S. and over in Europe, and people are getting tired of it. They're getting tired of being called racist every time they say, we need to control our borders. Because it isn't racism. Illegal isn't a race. Just keep that in mind. We're going to take a phone call. Sean in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It definitely holds water that their water crisis would stop them from being a significant threat to us in a war. I have heard programs from reputable sources, including Dave Hodges, that's done entire programs on the fact about China. The other thing I wanted to discuss with you, I'll go ahead and spit them all out. There's 3 of them, and just listen to what you have to say off the air. Is this whole, I know you're having fun with this Weinstein thing, but my concern is, they're going to take him down. They've taken Bill Cosby down. I think there's a plot behind this that it's all going to lead to Donald Trump. Oh, now that we've taken in, everybody agrees, now we have to look at Donald Trump and what he's done.
Hillary's already saying that. Hillary's already out there trying to draw a parallel between Harvey Weinstein and Donald Trump, and every time somebody says, isn't it a closer link to Bill Clinton, and she says, oh, that happened so long ago. Your people are so petty. I agree.
And lastly, the last comment I wanted to is people call in that want to talk about a violent uprising in the country.
Well, I'll be very.
All the way back to Vietnam, they beat us with booby traps.
I'll be very honest with you that I think a move to confiscate all guns might trigger a violent uprising.
They would either need foreign mercenaries or some kind of foreign army to come in here to do that.
Well, they certainly have enough Muslims here now to create a new army that would have no love for the American people. But you're right. The ordinary rank-and-file military are probably not interested in going along with a military coup d'etat of the United States. And several years ago, there was this test called the Combat Arms Survey that was done on the U.S. Marines who are exempt from posse comitatus. And I had a friend, business associate, that had been a Marine at 29 Palms when the test was being done. And he confided that the Marines all said, yes, they would confiscate guns from the American people. They would kill Americans who resisted because the officers made it clear that's the answer that they wanted on this combat arms survey. But he said the reality is that hardly anybody in his group of Marines really thought that. They were just doing as they were told. And going on back to this USS Shane, the leaks coming out of there about how demoralized those Navy crewmen are, it is doubtful that the U.S. Could marshal an effective fighting force against the American people. Look how much trouble they're having just in the wars they've got now. Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, the whole thing. So it's problematic. I just don't want to take that chance right now. And I don't think the American people are really at that stage yet where they would welcome this idea of a violent revolution. I still think our best option is to stay calm and watch our government implode, because it's doing it right now. We're on our way to a Soviet Union-style collapse of our central government with all this scandal about Uranium One coming out, the economy about ready to take a huge plunge. I think it's coming apart. And we don't want to give the government any excuses to just say, all right, it's a national emergency, martial law, no more Constitution, and then things really would get worse. Now, I may be wrong, but I do not like this idea of a military violent revolution in the streets. I'm concerned that our government may start one in order to put it down. And that may be what all this Black Lives Matter, convincing the black people to be violent, is really all about. Yeah, I'm afraid you're absolutely right on that one. But the question is, the American people aren't buying these false flags anymore. The poll numbers are not showing that people are buying it. Las Vegas, every day goes by, more and more of the survivors who were actually there are coming out and saying, yes, there were multiple shooters. And now apparently there's a video of a shooter up on one of the billboards. And it's falling apart. And we have literally they're trying to lock down the hotels. One of the survivors has filed a lawsuit against the Mandalay Bay, and the judge has ordered the preservation of all evidence. It may be a little too late for that. But every time they do another one of these false flags and we rip it to pieces here on the independent media, the American public comes to understand, yes, this government rules us through lies, fraud, and deception. As far as China and its water is concerned, I would think that some nation somewhere is going to make it a high priority, worthy of a Manhattan-style project with serious investment in engineering to provide low-cost, high-volume water filtration desalination. And there's a lot of interesting technologies out there. But, of course, from the corporate mind, it's much more reliable and cheaper to suck what fresh water is left out of the earth, put it in a bottle, and sell it in the store. But when that starts to run out, I think there will be alternative technologies that become available. Just like as the oil and gas runs out, they'll start looking at other technologies like thorium cycle reactors, for example. Okay, Sean, we're going to let you go. We're running out of time here, and we're.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right. Well,
talks about
James, you're kind of meandering. I want to go back to your original point, and you raise a good one. Why are all these cities in Texas including a no boycott of Israel clause in the applications for aid to rebuild their homes? And it's already provoked a huge, huge backlash and a huge amount of anger. It's already been denounced as completely unconstitutional. And I think the people of Texas need to find out just whose bright idea this was and make sure that they are given the pink slip next election, because it is wholly inappropriate.
Governor Abbott wrote it in.
Governor Abbott wrote it in? Well, friends in Texas, Abbott needs to go.
Like, yeah. If you're not friends of Israel, you're not friend of Texas, or something like that. And like anybody who's offering a grant or something, that they basically, if you're involved in that, you're not going to get any assistance of anything. That's any type of state assistance.
That is wholly inappropriate for a state governor to be doing, because his first responsibility, his first allegiance and loyalty is to the people of his state. And talk about an obvious sellout and an obvious puppet. And a reminder, we live under puppet rule, foreign puppet rule. Anyway, James, I'm going to have to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with another phone call. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take one more phone call here, and that's Don in Iowa. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
They'll put him on because he's a charming, witty guy, and he'll sit there and he'll present the contrary view to what they're normally trying to say there on these. They're normally trying to be cheerleaders. The stock market will go up forever and all that. And they call this guy Dr. Doom, Mark Faber. But now he's 71 years old. He's probably ready to say hell with it anyway and retire. But I mean, I'm sure when he made this remark, he knew this stuff would happen to him. But they kicked him off all the boards he was on, boards of directors, and then they say they're not going to have him anymore on TV.
Well, I mean, I understand what he's saying, but it probably could have been phrased a little bit more politely. And, you know, the issue here, though, is when they talk about nations with different ethnic populations, there's a reality everybody needs to look at. Europe is the way it is because it was built by the Europeans. Africa is the way it is because it was built by the Africans. And this idea that the fact that Africans don't have a European-style culture, it represents some form of oppression, is nonsense. We are all living in the cultures and societies that we collectively work together to produce. And it's not racist to point on out that, yes, there are differences in our cultures and our societies because we engineered it that way. Anyway, listen, Don, I need to let you go. I'm going to squeeze in one more phone call before the top. Dave in Missouri, aloha. What's on your mind?
Hey, howdy, aloha, Mike. Talked to you yesterday. How's your day, brother?
So far, so good. We're short on time. What's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to kind of finish up, and so so we discussed yesterday how Walmart purchased both political parties to achieve retail monopoly, and then used those political influences to advance a free trade agenda, emptying our factories out, destroying the middle class, transferring the wealth to communist China. So this is where I wanted to follow up. I kind of meant to get there yesterday, but this is a big topic. It's hard to really discuss in a short amount of time. So
well, unfortunately, Dave, I'll tell you what. Dave, call into the show on Monday, just when we're starting one of the big segments, and I'll let you talk. But we'd have to do station identification and...
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.